Hello, and welcome to this season of Alter Ego. We are starting season 1 with the topic of addiction in Butler County. Conversations on the physical side of addiction, trauma, the neuroscience, mental health, and stigma surrounding addiction. Experts, resources, and stories from people who have fought addiction head on. I am your host, Laura Krigo. Let's keep the conversation going. Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. For a long time, I suffered with depression and anxiety. I had tried therapy before, but struggled finding a therapist I connected with until I found BetterHelp. That's why I am so excited to share BetterHelp's mission to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, because finding a therapist can be hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online. Remote therapy sessions, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. Click the link in description and receive 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. And by clicking that link, you support this channel. Plus, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. I was struggling for a long time, and BetterHelp was where I found my therapist, Whitney, who I still see weekly for almost 2 years now. So, if you're struggling like I was, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in description or go to betterhelp.com/alterego. That's betterhelp.com/alterego. There's no better time than now to start your mental health journey. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. The following episode contains 2 personal stories of addiction. My first guest, Rebecka, shares her battle with drugs, alcohol, and an eating disorder. My second guest, Tawny, shares her drug use and suicidal thoughts. These are very sensitive topics, and I am grateful for these women being so brave and vulnerable. If you are sensitive to these topics, please listen at your own discretion. Now to the episode.
I think whenever I share my story, I always say so I believe that I used drugs and alcohol because I did not like my reality. So since I couldn't change my reality at such a young age, I changed my perception of my reality because I was able to do that. And I ended up, when I was early teens, did that with drugs. But before then, I would do that with other things. That's what I always say. I grew up in what is a cliche household with like drug addicts, right? My parents were extremely young when they had me. They were teenagers, like 15, 16 years old, and they'd already had my sister a year prior than that. And both of those two were drug addicts as well, and alcoholics. So that was the foundation of my life right there. I think there's a lot of trauma and poverty, which I know we've talked about a little bit, and that I had to deal with. So we were very poor. My parents were not educated. They used drugs as an outlet. My father was in and out of jail, as was my mother. There was domestic violence. So it was not a very healthy place to grow in. And you learn a lot about how trauma affects a child and then how it affects you in adult life. And I was in a constant state of being afraid. There's no other way to go around it. And fear is healthy, but to remain at that level of constant fear is not healthy.
Yeah.
And that's what it was kind of like for me as a child. And so the first thing I did was I would kind of detach from reality. I would be in my head. My imagination was crazy when I was young, right? And it saved me and it helped me because all of this chaos could be going on over here, but I'd be like in a castle with a prince and a dragon, like over here in my head. Yeah, so that was really how I just disassociated with the world at first, and it's not healthy, but it worked for me and it got me through. When I got older, it was books. I'd become obsessed with reading and stuff like that. I did the same thing with like education, learning new things. And then when I was, I want to say 10 or 11 is when I started to use drugs. I think it was just like I had like a strawberry daiquiri that I took out of someone's cooler or something, nothing mind-boggling. But the progression of me using drugs was extremely quick.
Okay.
I started smoking weed, which is a lot of people's story, which is, you know, I started doing pills. I started doing cocaine and crack. And I was in rehab on my 18th birthday. I was already homeless and in rehab on my 18th birthday. The progression was rather quick. Once I found something I liked, it just released me from any type of care I had. I was not socially awkward. I wasn't anxious all the time. I could breathe. Nothing like bothered me. And it was the first time that I didn't try and like be perfect for everybody to like get people's love and attention. It freed me. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why most people become addicts. And a lot of people have said that was what they went through in recovery, right? Was realizing that wasn't who they were. They convinced themselves that's who they were. Mm-hmm. When they did drugs and how they acted, they're like, well, this is who I am. And it was their reality, but it also was a way to, disconnect to what was really happening.
Yeah.
And that's what most people say. It was coping.
It worked for a while until it stopped working. My story is, I don't want to say like different from anyone else's because it's not at all, but I went to rehab when I was 18 and I stayed abstinent from drugs and alcohol for about 5 years. What happened within that time, and what I'm sure you've learned from talking to different people, is sometimes addiction isn't just drugs and alcohol. It can be sex, it can be gambling, it can be eating, so forth like that. So within that 5-year time frame, I developed an eating disorder.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I basically replaced one thing for another. And that, it's common, it's very common for that to be a problem with mostly women that are, have the disease of addiction. And unfortunately, I went down that path and it was almost more insidious than I feel like drugs. Drugs and alcohol, you're mainly told to remain abstinent. But if you don't eat, that's a problem. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was just, I wasn't really doing therapy and working on what I should have been working on. And I just became just obsessed with that. And, I mean, by the end of the time now, it would volley back and forth. I would go to rehab for drug use. Then I would have to go to a rehab for an eating disorder. Then I'd go to a rehab for drug use and then it was just one thing or the other. Like I was still.
Those were your two norms.
Yeah.
Those were your things that, wow. Okay.
I would go back and forth with that. And it was very unhealthy. An eating disorder really, my EKGs are not normal because I messed up my heart from that. You can rupture your esophagus. It was, I was very, very tiny. I think the last time I weighed myself, I was under 90 pounds. And I was just like, whatever you were trying to accomplish, you did it. Like it was, yeah. So that's been a hard road, too. And I finally had to realize this last time when I went to rehab for drug use, I was like, I can't hold on to this other thing because this other thing is usually like a secret and I don't tell anybody. And people just tell me how skinny I am and I bask in the control I have to be that way. Mm-hmm. And I realized, I was like, listen, you may have to gain like 20, 30 pounds in order to have a good life, in order to also not use drugs. Because you're doing one thing and you'll go back to the other thing. And that's when I just accepted. I was like, okay, I'm going to have to gain weight. I'm going to have to do this. Yeah.
Because did you ever have a point where you realized like one of these or both of these could kill me?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've I've overdosed from the drug use, and eating disorders have a higher death rate. So yeah. But it was it was hard. I look at my like eating disorder as basically just it's the disease of addiction with the need to control, because it was all about control for me.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't tell me, and I have so much control over myself because look how restrictive I can be. But also, nobody else can tell me what to eat. You can't force me to do that. So it was like I didn't have a lot of control in my life as a child. So I just clung on to that as an adult, and that put my body through a lot of bad things.
Do you remember sort of what I can't go back to this now. Like I have to stop the drugs, but I can't go back to that. So like what was the real, I mean, you'd been going to rehab, right?
Yeah.
Was there sort of something that really just started to make it all click? And
my last time like out and about getting high was I had gotten arrested, and that was my first time being in jail. And I am not jail made. I'm not made for it. I don't like it. I don't like to brag about it. I don't like any part of it. It was not a good experience for me. The detox from heroin in jail with nothing, I didn't like it. But even so, I was in jail, and the moment I got out of jail, I was calling rehabs to get into a rehab, but I was also calling to get high as well. I didn't want to have to do that again, but I was still trying to get high. So yeah, I went to rehab, and then while I was in rehab, I stayed at like a 90-day rehab.
mm-hmm.
And I have a daughter. Her name's Sophia. And during that time when I was at rehab, my rights were taken away.
Oh,
and
wow.
it was it was the first time where there was nothing to do to solve the problem. I couldn't do anything. I just the only thing I could do was sit there and be sad. That was it. And in Pennsylvania, once your rights get taken away, you can never get them back. Like, I will never, ever.
So you still don't?
No, I see my daughter has a room at my house. I see her and talk to her every day.
Mm-hmm.
But the state of Pennsylvania says I do not have the right to be a mother.
Wow.
Yeah, and I can't ever get those back. Thankfully, my her father's parents have her. And she's understanding. She's been going to therapy since she was 5. We're open about drug addiction. She is fully aware. She knows why she lives there and why she can't, stay with us full time. And we do it takes a village type of mentality with raising her. But yeah, that moment, because every time I was in rehab before, and I've been to a lot of rehabs, I always had the same main goal. I was going to get clean and sober. I was going to get a job. I was going to get my daughter back. We were going to live together happily ever after. And that is the only thing. It was like a litany in my mind. I just had to do this and it would be fine. And every time it fell through and it didn't work. And now this time they took that option away from me. They took the goal I always had away from me. So it's like, so now what? All I ever wanted was to, get my daughter back. So just sitting there and realizing well, this is it. Everything that, losing my daughter was, that was the moment where I was like, I can't do this. And I can't do I can't do the drugs. I can't do the eating disorder. We really have to focus on what is wrong and figure it out.
Get to the root of it. There's obviously something that caused you to start doing the drugs in the first place, but then to continue on this journey. And then, like you said, when you got out of jail, you were making phone calls here and you were making phone calls here, right? And there's, a lot of the stigma behind it. A lot of people will be like, oh, what's the matter? Why are people doing that? And it's like, it's not that simple though.
Right.
Your brain was wired and you chemically needed what the drugs were replacing, these endorphins that the drugs were creating in your mind that you felt. Your body wasn't producing those endorphins anymore. And you didn't know that. It's not like you're like, okay, I know what the problem is. And I just got to I got to be somewhere where I'm supported and I'm figuring out, but then you're recognizing what your triggers are, right? Because there's triggers.
Mm-hmm.
In order for you to talk about all these things, and just first and foremost, thank you for talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this has to be something that you've put a lot of work into, and to be able to talk about this. I mean, I think we all do get to a point in your life where you're like, this is what I did. Like,
Right.
this is why I made these choices. And, you know, when you're going through it, these feelings of like shame and you're disappointed in yourself, like you don't need it from anyone else, right?
Yeah.
You're already feeling that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that a lot of people have brought up this season too, that nobody is harder on themselves about being addicted than an addict.
Right. Yeah. I can, there's just an inner rage almost at yourself. Like has always been a violent inner self-hatred. And whenever I was at treatment this last time, I feel like one of the first things that I did was I have mental health, I have depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I maintained my medication schedule. Like I stayed on medication. Usually I'd be on it for a little bit, and then when I felt better, I'd get off of it, and then I'd end up relapsing. So that was a big thing. I'm still on medication all these years later. But also finding myself and being compassionate to myself were the two biggest things also that helped. The whole finding myself, someone would be like, how do you feel right now? I'm like, I don't know. They're like, do a body scan. How's everything feeling? I have no idea. I'm completely detached from my mental and physical state are two completely separate things. Like they're not united at all. So I would just they would make me sit outside for like 10 minutes each day and just try and connect with myself so that I could literally, as like you're in kindergarten, be able to tell you how I feel. This is a feelings chart. This is how I'm feeling right now. Like that simple. I was very detached. Or like finding out what I like and what I didn't like. I would have like this notebook by my bed, and each time I figured out something new about myself, I would write it down.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole compassion piece is the one exercise is always think of somebody that means a lot to you in your life that has like loved you and stuff like that. Mine would be my grandmother, right? She ended up having to raise us because my parents just couldn't do it. And they'd be like, now imagine her saying things to you that you say to yourself. I'm like, my grandmother would never. She doesn't raise her voice or cuss first off.
Yeah. So you're like, I can't imagine that. Yeah. But that's a good exercise.
Yeah. So whenever you want to do that self-hate and speak negatively about yourself, imagine it's that person. What would that person say to you? Because that person loves you. That person wouldn't be doing that. So I did those types of exercises and being able to find compassion in myself. For a lot of my problem stems from trauma and how I am like now. Like I'm very introverted, don't like to go out in public. I have a lot of social anxiety, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But being able to be like, this is who I am and this is how I am and this is why I am that way, and that's okay.
Yep.
And that was a huge
Absolutely.
thing. Yeah.
Well, I think that's what a lot of people struggle with too. And if you were social in that capacity when you were doing those things and you liked it, right? Maybe it's hard to sort of be like, well, it's not that I don't like to. I feel differently about it now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's okay. It's like, but I think that's also something I've come to realize too. They do say that, and it gets even more so when you get into your 40s, because I know you're not in your 40s yet.
Not yet.
You're not there yet. When you get to your 40s, you really are like, oh, you don't like me?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like I can't, I could sit here all day and beat myself over the head like I used to do and be like, why doesn't this person like me? Like, what did I do? Did I say something? And you focus so much on this one thing.
Yeah.
And then there's all these other people that just accept you for who you are.
Yeah.
And love you no matter what. I mean, I think that's a lot of times why people don't. If somebody doesn't like me, I'm like, okay, but like, do you know the whole story?
Right. Yeah.
And if you don't, that's fine. Or if you're not willing to listen, that's okay. I'm not going to sit here and try to sell myself to you. I'm trying to sell myself to me most of the time, you know? I'm
Yeah.
just trying to keep myself going. So, yeah, I imagine that all of those things, and then, you know, this one thing that you're fighting for, you know, your daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and then have that taken.
Yeah.
So after that, when did that happen in this process? Like you said, you had been back and forth in rehabs, right?
Yeah.
And when that happened, how did you work through that and come to the realization, like, well, I'm not going to completely lose her. Like, I know I'm going to be in her life and I've got to do this for her. Like you said that, like,
Yeah.
you're like, I really got to get it together.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like one of my main problems is that I would put Sophia's situation as my situation as a child. And I could not. It took me a while to get past it. I was like, well, she has to live with her grandparents. I'd live with my grandparents. Her parents are drug addicts. My parents were drug addicts. Just suspect. And I put the way I felt as a child on how she must feel as a child.
Oh,
And that is not the
yeah.
case. And it took like therapy and just constantly people saying like, well, here's the difference. Like I didn't see my mom past the age of 9, right? That's not the case with Sophia. My family was very physically abusive. Sophia's never been physically or emotionally abused. So that was one thing. And I have to remind myself about that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is I had to remember that it's not my story anymore, it's Sophia's. My story was Sophia and I would live together in a little white picket fence with a little dog and everything was going to be great. That's not her story. I'm trying to make her story the way I want it. Sophia's story is that she has to live with her grandparents because her parents were drug addicts. But there's so much more. She loves us. I know she loves us. She talks to us every day. She calls me whenever there's like everything. We go down to see her every day. It's like
you're
I said,
involved in her life.
She comes
yeah.
up. Yeah.
I remember you had the one day you were like, you had to be out of here because she had a school dance and had to do the hair and all
makeup.
the things.
Yeah. If there's homework. Yeah. We have to, we're down there, like I said, all the time. It's just that on paper, she cannot, live with us. But it was a hard thing and it was a slow process because it was, Sophia could only talk to me on the phone at first for the first few months. And then I got to see her. And it's understandable. I have to realize that people are only trying to keep my child safe.
Yes.
And they're trying to keep her safe from me.
Yeah.
But I cannot be mad at someone for trying to keep my child safe.
Of course.
But it was a very slow process. But I think the biggest thing was just initially that I was sad and that I was just going to have to feel sad. And I know that sounds so simple, but for somebody that just masks their emotions all the time with drugs, it was super hard to do, to just sit there and be sad.
Well, and that kind of a sadness, it's almost overwhelming, right? There are times where it's literally like you physically can't eat, right?
Yeah, it's suffocating.
And then there's that, right? Because then you're back onto this sort of, so finding that balance. I mean, I've had that kind of sadness where it's like you can't function, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't think about anything. And the statistics are that the more times that someone actually goes back to rehab, the percentage of them recovering or becoming sober and living a life that they probably never imagined they could live, it goes up.
Yeah.
And people don't think that. The talk was always negative, right? Oh, well, it's their 4th time in rehab. It's like, well, now that we know, oh, hey, it's actually their 4th time in rehab. Like, that's how we need to be saying those things. So like your story is, the lesson here for anyone out there is that we should be giving people a chance.
Yeah, because people can sometimes be very brutal in their lack of empathy about it. And I always have to say in my mind, people that are a lot smarter than anybody that has stigmatized me know that it is a mental illness. And I'm not going to be shamed about that. You're not going to make me feel like a bad person. I'm not a bad person. I know I used to think that I was a very bad person, but I know deep in my soul, when all else fails, I'm like, kids and puppies love me. how could I be a bad person? Like, isn't that how you know?
I mean, and it's kind of funny with, depression and just sort of how you end up in these places, right? Where you had like two battles. You had two things that you were battling. And then you've got laser focus on this one thing that you're just fighting for and having to come out of that. And so are you working on your second degree right now, or did you just graduate?
I'll graduate in May with a bachelor's in computer science with like a 3.9 GPA.
3 snaps and a Z formation. We have to start changing the way that we are talking to people, approaching these situations. Obviously, like, trust is, you got to build trust, right? Whenever someone is first going into rehab, they've got to feel comfortable talking to you about what they're about to say. If you were to say to someone out there who maybe has gone through something similar to you, what would you say was one of the things that like really, really helped you? Other than like, I'm going to throw this at you, other than therapy, where was the most support that you felt like you had?
So the most support, I think there's different things. So my family, I know. So once I realized that my mental health had to be a main thing that I focused on, just letting them know, we need to make sure I take my medication every day. These are the things to look out for. If I'm acting like this, I need you to bring it to my attention. I will probably not be happy that you have brought it to my attention. But I need you to bring it to my attention to begin with, because there's a chance I'm off my medication and I've got a bright idea. So it's first and foremost. The same thing with the drug use and the eating disorder, making the people that are in my circle that I live with, my family, my friends, making them aware. And can you please help me look out for myself? Because sometimes you can be in the middle of something before even realizing you've began it. That's usually what happens. So just making sure that I had a support group, even if it was small, but just people that were closest to me knew what to look for. I think that's important. There's a bond that is formed over sharing pain with somebody. So in terms of like therapy or support group, that is why like that's important to me. That community and sharing a painful thing with somebody and someone be able to be like, I can relate. You don't need to feel shame. You're not alone. That type of thing is super important. And that kind of blocks out any stigma that there may be, because there's a group of people that don't judge me and that understand.
That's huge. You knew that going to rehab was what you needed to do, and you knew therapy, you knew like focusing on your mental health. So that's probably the last part of it, right? It's just figure out like what is going to help you, like try different things. A lot of people say, therapy is their thing, AA is their thing, NA is their thing, going to rehab. And sometimes it can just be going to rehab and finding that counselor that you trust, that you can talk to, and they're going to guide you. And in anything that they say to you, you're going to trust it, right?
No, but that's a good point, that what works for me may not work for you. And that's the beauty in the human experience, that we're different. Yeah. Yep. It reminds me, somebody had to tell me before, honesty without compassion is cruelty. So if I'm being honest, but I'm not being compassionate in my honesty, then I'm being cruel. And that's not okay to be like that.
Say that again.
Honesty without compassion is cruelty.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I always think about that. I can be honest with anybody that I want, but I need to also be compassionate about that when I'm talking to them.
Yes,
I don't
because
need to be an a-hole.
You heard it right here, folks.
Yeah.
The thing is that sometimes, when you respond to someone like that, it's obviously your inability to deal with the emotions of the situation or understand it or be sympathetic to it, right? Mm-hmm. Some people are very set in their ways. They're very like, this is right, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, we have to start stepping out of that. We really need to live a little bit more in a gray area, I think.
Yeah, black and white thinking. It's not good.
No, it's not good. And it's also, too, the people that will get really in a tizzy over that are the same ones that are, sometimes upset over Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. It needs to just come down to, hey, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Yeah, nobody wants to be a drug addict.
No.
Nobody in their right mind wants to be a drug addict.
This is coming from someone who's experienced this.
Yeah.
I hear that from everyone.
Yeah. No, that's not a choice. You don't choose that. Who's going to choose going through withdrawal, letting people down, being homeless, going to jail, losing your children, not having any money, being like you're insane if you choose that, which is why it's a mental illness. Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
If you are somebody that is struggling with drug use, alcohol, gambling, sex, eating disorder, whatever, like you're not alone, and it does get better. And there are a lot of resources available. And if you are a friend or a family member to somebody that is dealing with that, which I feel like at this point, they're everywhere, like you are, their support for you as well. And it does get better. It's a very sad sickness that affects the community, the individual, and the families. But there is hope. And the hope is people, other people.
I'm Joe Mahoney, Executive Director at the Ellen O'Brien Geyser Center, and it's time for another mental health lightbulb moment. Developmental stages also influence the effect that the environment can have on our chemistry. For instance, poor maternal care can diminish the ability of a child to respond to stress in appropriate manners, while a maternal diet high in fats can cause increases in the child's reward center in their brain. Understanding these mechanisms better will help us design better interventions throughout a person's life.
When you were talking about that, when you were looking for a job, what were you starting to say?
Well, it's just like I would question myself. Like I would ask people, like, should I lie and say that I have a criminal history, or should I be honest? Because I know people that lied and they found out later and got fired. And then I know people that told the truth and never got hired to begin with. So, like,
nobody can hold that against you. We all have those thoughts, right? Thinking, but I need to get a job. The fact that you're like, I need to get a job.
Yeah.
You want to get a job. You want to work. You want to make money. You want to be able to support yourself, your children, your family. You want to be able to do that stuff. So,
I mean, I started drinking at 11, and I feel like I liked it more than most people. I still can remember the very first time I ever got drunk, and just the freedom I felt inside of myself, just this is it, this is my answer. This is what I'm going to do. And then that's what I strived to do every single chance I got. And like you said, it just led into other things. And,
that's how it starts, right?
Yep.
And you feel good, right? You said you felt free the whole time, becoming a mom. Talk through that a little bit, and then how that kind of took you to, I'd say, talk about that up until 2017, which was a big sort of turning point for you, right? 2017.
Yeah. So I got introduced to heroin when I was 14, and that's kind of where everything took off. So 14 to 16, I was in 3 rehabs and a halfway house by then. And I had 3 kids by the time I was 24. So in addiction, young mom, it just, when I think back at the things I put them through, it's very heartbreaking, and it took me a long time to forgive myself for all that stuff,
Of course.
So I was in and out of jail a lot. And at this point, my ex-mother-in-law was raising my kids. She had custody of them. And I had went to this court hearing and asked for a bond reduction so I could get out of jail. And the DA had said, I use the excuse that I need to get home to my kids. And I knew very well, I didn't even have my kids. So he said to the judge, she is in no way, shape, or form in any place to be around a child at all. Like I started bawling because he was absolutely right. But in my head, I was like this like number one mom, you know?
You loved your kids.
Yeah.
When someone goes through something like this, that's probably one of the hardest things when you're a parent, right? Because everybody just thinks, why didn't you? And you're like, you had an addiction, right? You had something that you literally had no control over. And it's like nobody was able to separate that from like how you felt about your kids.
Yeah. But it does override your mother instinct. It does. Addiction is that powerful that you just, you'll put your kids on the back burner in a heartbeat if it means you're going to get what you need.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, because it was almost like your identity, right?
Yeah.
Kind of becomes your identity. Okay. So he didn't reduce your bond then?
He did not. No.
Okay.
But that still sticks with me to this day. And when I do see that man, I still thank him because he was kind of like a major, like, that was like one of my eye-opening moments, you know? Mm-hmm. There was a few of them, but that was one of them.
Okay. So then from there, where did things sort of go?
So, I mean, in and out of jail a little bit more after that. I did get put on drug court in 2015. And
for anyone who's listening, like, just kind of explain that, like what drug court is.
So drug court it's kind of like a little bit of like a second chance. So it's when you have all like a bunch of charges or like a felony charge facing state time.
Okay.
In most cases. And they say, okay, you can do drug court, you can complete our court, and we reduce what your charges are down to this. You just have to follow like our rules and basically do what we tell you and pass so many drug tests a week and attend so many meetings. And that's what they put me on.
And you get to talk when you're on drug court too, don't you? Do you get to, was that part of what you were doing then, or was that later on?
I talk now because I'm like I graduated. So they ask me to come back every so often and share my story with the other people in drug court. But it's like really nice to see like you get to kind of interact with a judge in a non-judgy way. Yeah, of course. So like you go up and to the podium and the judge asks you questions about how you're doing. It's just like a court system, but it's more laid back.
So you did that, and then a lot of things sort of shifted for you in 2017. And you did say, though, when you were on drug court, that you really felt like they were really like rooting for you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That they really wanted to, you know, when you talk about the DA, the judges, the officers, anybody who was there involved in that they truly, it felt like a very supportive system for you. And you also, AA, right, is something that you
basically just, so they're called the 12 steps. And like once, and this is specifically for me, but once I worked those steps and apply them to my life every day, I found a freedom that was better than the freedom I found in drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And I do always like to say, like, whenever I stand up like at drug court or anything, if I ever do fail in the future and decide to go back, it is not the fault of AA. It's my fault, you know? So like, I feel like a lot of people, and even me in the past, has used that as an excuse that like, oh, well, that person didn't stay clean. That person didn't stay sober. That must not have worked. But it's because I'm not working the program. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, you know?
Because it has worked for you.
It has.
You've been sober since April 2007.
Right? So I went to jail first. So I was in jail for a couple months.
That's right.
And then they sent me to rehab because I did mess up on drug court. I had ended up relapsing a couple times. And the very last time in 2017 is when I was questioning if they were going to just send me upstate and not give me another chance.
Yeah.
And at that point, I had like burned my bridges with my family. They were tired of it. My kids were tired of it. Everyone.
They put you in the hole when you went that last time too, didn't you?
They did, yeah.
And you said you received a letter
Yes.
from a friend.
Yes.
And before you talk about that and how that made you feel, when you were sitting there before they took you in and you were having all these thoughts, right? You're like, this is it. That was my last chance, and I'm probably going to go upstate, and you're going to end up in state prison, which is a whole different ballgame, right?
Yeah.
And a little harder to probably get out. And you received this letter, but when you were sitting there, you had decided something. You had made a decision. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So like I described that like basically that whole month prior as like the lowest, like darkest point in my life. Like I literally was thinking like my only way out was to die. You know what I mean? Like I was never going to be able to get clean and sober. Nothing was helping me feel that old freedom that I used to find. So that's what I was kind of contemplating in that jail cell. And then I did get this letter, and more or less it just basically was like, what are you gonna do? Like, how long are you gonna keep doing this same thing? And like, it just broke me down. And at that point I made a decision to just try it, you know, like what could it hurt? If I try and fail, at least I can say I tried it and it didn't work, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
that was it, right?
yeah.
And then after that was when you get one call at first. You don't have any calls while you're in the hole.
No calls.
Unless someone like gives you money, right? So you had nothing. There was nobody your family was pretty much like, at that point, they're like, all right.
Yeah.
So when you received a letter from a friend, and we're just going to say this person is a friend, anything you want to share about that and how that made you feel?
It made me feel believed in, that somebody else maybe saw some potential in me that I couldn't see in myself. And it gave me enough hope to kind of carry me through and making that decision to do something different this time.
To change.
Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of times that's it, right? And that's something we talk about a lot this season. And, Mike Kelly said that there's so many people, young people he has seen that he used to coach like Little League or football.
Yeah.
And they've grown up and he's gone to these funerals and they died from drug addiction, being an alcoholic. And he's like, there's such a loss of potential there.
Yeah.
And they obviously didn't think that about themselves, right? So that's a huge component of this. People can tell you over and over again, like that you're worthy and that you can do this, but it's like you have to like believe it and feel it for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes someone like that to just say, hey, listen, like I see you, I hear you. And that's where we're trying to go with this, is to really talk about the words that we're using. Rachel, your cousin, actually, she gave a really great printout. I'm going to share it this season about stigma, the words we're using, the way that we're saying things to people. Whenever that happened, you were in jail for 2 months, you went into rehab. And since then, a lot of things have happened for you, right? So you were in rehab. And what was it like when you were looking for work? That was tough.
It
right?
was, yeah. So I did have a baby after I ended up getting out of rehab. My son, he's 5 now. But I was a stay-at-home mom for a little bit. And once he hit 1 year old, I had like applied a couple places, and I was told that I needed to be honest, and I needed to give my background, give my criminal history. And like, I didn't even get an interview anywhere. So I started.
I mean, did you always feel like that was why you didn't get the interview?
Yes, 100%. I think at that point though, I wasn't fully confident in myself as I am today.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm like able to stand up for myself today, as where then I don't think I really was as much.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of about like learning who I was, creating who I want to be. So
that's right. And you said you also you did say that, creating who you want to be.
Yes.
Love that. And the other thing you said too was you started to realize like what real happiness was.
Mm-hmm.
Beginning of 2020, you started the job that you're still in now.
Yes.
So you worked on your sales license, and you work at Mike Kelly Hyundai dealership, right?
Yes.
And you are a saleswoman.
I am.
Yes. What was that experience like? Like when you went through that process, what was that like? I mean, getting hired, and I don't know, how'd you feel? I mean, I know I'm sure you felt great, but
I did. I was excited. I was like, finally somebody hired me. And I had, I'd already known like the background of the owner. So
yeah.
I kind of knew that like he was a little bit more open-minded as far as people with backgrounds. And I had known a couple people that worked there. So I do think that helped too, but I was very excited.
And you moved up. You didn't start as a saleswoman. I don't know. Saleswoman, what do you want to?
Saleswoman's okay.
Saleswoman, salesperson. Yes.
Sales consultant is what they call us.
Oh, I like that. Sales consultant. Tawny Sailor, sales consultant.
Yes.
Talk about that, moving up, all of that process.
So I started as a greeter. And I still remember like this is the scenario that they used to like give me that I would make a good salesperson. Was that there was this lady that came in and she was like just so distraught over this, like, you know, those letters you get in the mail that are like fake, they're not real.
Yes.
So she was like so distraught because she thought her car was getting taken, and I like was so like kind and nice to this poor little old woman. And they were like, yeah, you need to move into sales. So I was a little bit like hesitant at first just because of the hours. I had kids. So.
But you did it. You got your sales license.
Got my sales license. They did put me on a probation license at first, just because of my criminal background. So
yeah. But yeah, you're past that.
Yes.
We're past that now.
Yeah.
You're like hitting all these milestones and making things happen. You've been in this job for 4 years. You said that's the longest you've ever been in a job.
Yeah.
So if anything, you are just another wonderful example of why we do need to change not only our language, how we treat people, but giving someone the opportunity, right?
Yeah. I would just say don't give up. And for the people listening that have given up on, I won't really say given up because we're all like loved and cared for, obviously, by somebody. I just know for me, it took other people's like hope in me and belief in me to kind of see it myself. So like if you can be that for somebody, definitely be it for sure. I say it about drug court all the time. Like the probation officer there, the whole entire drug court team, the friend that wrote me that letter for sure as well. It was just like the little tiny bit of hope that I needed. And when you feel so low about yourself for so long and like you just have this belief that like I'm meant to be this like junkie drug addict for life because that's the way people view you. It's nice for somebody to see something different in you.
This episode is brought to you by Butler County District Attorney Richard A. Goldinger, R.W. McDonald & Sons Incorporated, Robert Stevens Jewelers. Thank you to our sponsors for your support on our first season of the Alter Ego podcast. Be sure to click the link in bio for your discount for BetterHelp Therapy online. 10% off your first month. Thank you for tuning in to Alter Ego. Join me every Monday and Wednesday for new episodes. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode and follow us on Instagram at Alter Ego Podcast. Until next time, stay safe, stay hopeful, stay kind.